All right, here we go, and we are live. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the IndieVerse, episode 20, I believe, actually, which is very exciting. Today, I'm joined by Dan and Robert. My name is Keelan. It's very nice to see everybody who's already been on the episodes before. If you're coming back and viewing again, or if you're live in the chat, it's great to have you here. I actually also write epic fantasy, so this is going to be a really fun conversation, but I'm going to pass it over to Dan and Robert to briefly introduce themselves.
Okay, well, I'm Dan Zangari. This is my son, Robert. We are a co-author team that have been writing fantasy, epic fantasy novels for a little while now. It all pretty much started with the ideas I have had in my head for many years, and started putting them on paper a few years ago. And then Robert was always interested in them and joined me in writing, and he's a better writer than I am. So I got the ideas and the storyline and things like that, but he's really good at actually developing characters and writing the story. So, but we've been doing this for over 10 years now.
Yep.
And I'm glad to be able to have him be there to help and to actually move this stuff forward, because it was really sluggish when I was trying to do it. So
he says that, and yeah, it'll be 29 years, I think.
Yeah.
Since he started working on this, and I jumped on. I'm Robert, by the way, and I jumped on about 9 years ago. Officially started writing together, and so so this is a lot of fun that we've had together as a father and son, and be able to come and together and bounce ideas off of each other, and it's just great.
It's so interesting. So I am like new to the world of co-authorship. So it's always so interesting to meet co-authors, and I've not yet met co-authors who are family. So that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. One of the first questions I always like to ask folks when they come on the IndieVerse is to tell us a little bit about like how you got into or interested in writing. Like basically, what is your writer origin story? And I think that is an interesting question, especially for the two of you, because it sounds like you maybe came into writing at different times and like then decided together. I'm really interested to hear like what your writer origin story is.
Well, I guess for me, it started when I was in my probably late 20s, early 30s, quite a while ago. And it started out, for me, I visualize things mostly. And so for me, it started out in drawing maps of the areas of the worlds that are kind of comprise our stories. And I started out that way. And then telling a story based on what's on the map. Here's this area, here's this country, here's this city, here's this, and here's the story behind that. And so it started more with me verbal, and then I got more into the actual writing and putting words on paper. But again, it was not anything that I thought of as actually publishing anything. It was more of the enjoyment of telling a story and just writing it down and sharing it, especially with Robert. And so that's kind of my origins. I do have a friend. I work. I'm an aerospace engineer by education and occupation, and so the company I work for, there was a woman there who actually was an author herself. She authored mystery novels, and when we were talking, and she said, "You gotta write this stuff," and so that kind of got me started. and I started writing, and I showed some of it to her, and then she gave me some good comments and things, and that is really kind of the impetus that got me going, and at least thinking about publishing the stories. So
Yeah, for me, I guess as in regard to writing, I really found a love for writing. I was serving a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I wrote in my journal every day. And I came home with 11 journals because I wanted to document everything that happened each day. And I kind of look back at that, and I can see where my style of getting into the nitty-gritty details kind of came out from. And that's kind of stuck with me. But my first actual published project that I self-published was nonfiction, and it was a martial arts book to promote my martial arts school that I had at the time. And that was in 2010. I think it was 2009 that I wrote it. I published it at the beginning of 2010. And my dad had been, for about 10 years, been kind of plodding along on our epic fantasy series. And yeah, I had given him input, like here and there and some ideas, but he was pretty much at the helm for that time. And after I got done self-publishing my book, he came to me and he said, "Do you want to help me out?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" And so that's kind of where it took off. And I was going to school at the time for biomedical engineering, so we were just kind of working part-time on it. And then we finished our first project, and then we shopped it around a bit with different publishers. And because it was really big, every publishing house wanted to split it in half. And we're like, nah, we're just going to go ahead and self-publish. So in 2013, we decided to self-publish our first book, which we eventually split into two.
That's so funny how that works out sometimes.
Yeah, we're like, maybe we should have split it. So, yeah.
That's so interesting, though, to hear both of the different origin stories and from two completely different places, I suppose, and especially the transition from nonfiction to fiction. That's just so cool. And so I guess my follow-up question to that is, why epic fantasy then? Is there a particular inspiration or something about the genre? I'm just curious, what about the genre for the both of you interests you so much?
Well, me, it's kind of a mixed bag. Growing up, I read science fiction and I read some fantasy. When I was a teenager, Lord of the Rings was getting big. The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings were getting big. And that kind of spurred me on. I really liked Lord of the Rings. I started reading more fantasy type books, but I still kept reading a lot of science fiction. I read a lot of Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, different authors. But I don't know. And then the other thing that I started to do when I first went to college in the late 70s, I got involved with some friends that were doing Dungeons and Dragons. And I got really involved in D&D type stuff. And I think that also kind of helped me from being interested in fantasy type stories. Just being involved with Dungeons and Dragons. That's kind of my story.
So I guess the reason why I'm writing epic fantasy is because he already established the framework, right? So it didn't give me a choice. But I love the genre. As far back as I can remember, the epic fantasy and fantasy has always been kind of a genre that I've gravitated to, whether that be in a video game. My earliest experience was with The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, which, that's a fantasy type story. And that was kind of one of my first experiences with it. Of course, I ended up reading a lot of the same books that my dad has read, and fell in love with Lord of the Rings and Chronicles of Narnia and the Book of Three series and Chronicles of Prydain, and of course the Forgotten Realms books, and then played a lot of Baldur's Gate and other Forgotten Realms games, and then moved on to EverQuest and EverQuest 2. And so the fantasy genre has always been kind of like an escape for me, and I love it. It's great. And so for me, and even though I like sci-fi, I don't know if I could write sci-fi, just because I would kind of tend to gravitate towards a more hard science fiction approach, and I'm not smart enough for that. So so I can write fantasy where I can just make crap up and just call it good.
So I have a follow-up question, because you're both engineers.
Yeah.
So I have a background in science and a master's in engineering, and so I was curious. I tend to head towards the hard fantasy, hard sci-fi, which is also why I don't write sci-fi. And I'm wondering, is that like a science engineering thing that there has to be rules?
I think so.
I think so.
I kind of think so.
Well, I kind of joke around. I'm left-handed, so I'm a left-handed engineer, so I don't think like a lot of engineers think. I think with the right side of my brain. So so it was a little different for me. But yeah, I think you're right. I think you kind of want as science or engineering, you want some structure.
Yeah, I think because we look at the world and there's some reasoning behind it, because especially with engineering, we want to know how things work, right? We got the knack.
Yeah, we got the knack.
And I think that's kind of what drives it. At least for me, because whenever I come up with a new magical item or I'm exploring the magic system a little bit more, I'm like, okay, how would this actually affect real world physics, and what kind of, could this actually be feasible? And at least
yeah, we both kind of approach it that way. Is when we're thinking about something, we think, well, will this work in a real world situation where there's, like you said, physics? How would this work? We can't. I think we're kind of bound by physical laws in terms of when we think of something and we're coming up with something in our stories. We want to make sure that it's at least reasonable and not too far-fetched, but yet grounded somewhat in physics. That you could say, even though it's like magic and stuff, it needs to be somehow plausible,
Yeah. I just I'm just always curious whenever I meet folks and I ask, hard magic, soft magic, hard sci-fi, soft sci-fi. I'm always curious to know what they do, if they do things outside of writing, what that is, because I don't know. I feel like the more science-y folks I meet, engineering folks I meet, they tend to lean towards the hard magic systems and the hard sci-fi and stuff like that. So that's really interesting. Following up to the question about epic fantasy, I guess it's a two-part question. What's your favorite part about writing epic fantasy? Maybe it's a particular trope. Maybe it's how large the stories can be. So what's your favorite part? And then contrast that with what's your least favorite part about writing epic fantasy? Also, as you think about the question, I see people trickling in. So if anybody does have any questions for Dan and Robert, please let us know in the chat and we'll get to all of your audience questions at the end.
You want me to take this first?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, what do I love about epic fantasy? I think I like the ability to have diversity in characters, and not just personalities and things like that, but different creatures, and they kind of explore things like, what would it be like to be a 1,000-year-old dragon? And what if that dragon was walking around like a human? And what would that be like? And I like, kind of exploring, that side of it, where if I was writing, some type of, story, the drama, Us on Earth, I'd be totally bored. I'd be like, I don't know. Let's see, what I don't like about epic fantasy. I guess because there's so much going on typically in an epic fantasy novel, it can get overly complex. And I guess getting to the point when you've stacked up so many things in the story that you've almost painted yourself into a corner, and so I think the vastness and it can be great, but if you let it get out of control, it can kind of get unwieldy, and you got to go back and kind of try to fix it. We had that actually in our novel that's getting edited right now, and at the end, because we're like, we wanted something to happen at the end, and we went and we started analyzing it, and we're like, crap, we can't have that happen, because that's going to affect what's going to happen in this other book, and that book's already published, and that's established canon, and we can't do that. So, yeah. All right, your turn.
Yeah. Okay, I guess for me the most favorite part is just how big I can make it. How large can I make this universe? How large can I make this story? And that kind of lends to the complication factor Robert's talking about. But the least favorite thing, I don't know. Probably. I'm not really good at character development. I think for me, it's like I want to have it set and just go. And then to have to develop the characters, you need to do that. But for me, that's probably the least favorite part of it for me.
Character development is my biggest weakness, so I hear you on that one. It is also like I sit there sometimes and I'm like, how do people do this? But it's really interesting to hear kind of like the different perspectives of like what people's favorite and least favorite parts are about a certain genre. So obviously you two are family members and working together, and I had a few questions about that as well. I'm just very curious, like what's that? And obviously it's been working well for a very long time, but what's it, I suppose this is a very broad question, but what's it like working with a writing partner who is in your family? And like, I guess second part to that is, what's your approach to co-authoring?
So it's kind of, I don't know, I know him well enough that I know what I can take to him and how I can approach it. And I feel like if I was co-authoring with someone else, I don't know if I could be as blunt, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. And I think because we have this solid relationship and this foundation that we can, yell at each other about arguing points on a manuscript, and we're okay about it.
Yeah.
It's like there's been many times when we've gone back and forth and had discussions, almost heated discussions, because we're Italian, so that comes naturally. But it's been interesting. He was actually across country most of our writing career, actually. So we were communicating via phone and Skype and email. We just sent stuff back and forth. And so we kind of got into this, working long distance and trying to get that working. And I think in the beginning, the distance probably helped, because if we were like really close and I think it would have been harder because it forced us to really be economical with our time. He was in a different time zone too. He was an hour ahead of me. And so, I couldn't call him at, 11 o'clock at night because it was midnight.
But he did. I would get calls at 1 a.m.
A few times. But like, I look at it and I think, okay, with us, being a father and son, we also, the other thing is we think a lot alike. And so I'll often get an idea and say, hey, what do you think about this? And then he'll come back and say, oh yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking when I wrote this very vague line that only has like one thing in it that you can't, get really much out of it. So I'm like, okay. So, that's been very helpful, being, having known each other for so long and being so much alike, that I think that's helped me personally make the process of co-authoring easier. And as far as how we handle it, it's kind of changed over the years. Like when I first started, I was going over things that my dad had written. And so I was kind of acting more or less like an editor, and then going through and seeing where we could expand it. And then it eventually grew into a place where we started planning together. And that's what we do now. We plan and plot everything together, and then I'll go and write it because I'm the faster writer. So he'll just, this way.
He can type. I can't type.
That's another reason why it took him so long to get stuff down on paper.
Lousy typist.
And so that's kind of where we're at now. Like if anyone reads our stuff, it's going to be mainly the prose is coming from me, and my dad goes through and he'll do editing and stuff like that, and we'll do things on revisions. And so we kind of like switched, I guess, from where we initially started. We kind of mirrored.
Yeah. Well, and we kind of moved away from the original storyline. That was one of the other things my friend told me was, you're starting in the middle of the story, you should start at the beginning. And so I had written a lot of stuff that we haven't even published yet, that I wrote years ago. And so we've gone back and started from the beginning. So yeah, I think there's part of that going on. But I'm more the bright colors, broad strokes type, and he's the real good detailed writer. And so I think that we complement each other there that way, where I've got the ideas, I'm kind of the idea guy, and he's the detailed guy that will fill it in and really make it into a good story. He's got the patience to do that. That's my problem. I don't have a lot of patience for that. Yeah. But I do have a lot of patience for listening and saying, okay, we work through it, like he said.
Yeah.
I was going to say that kind of works well for us as co-authors because of our different strengths. I feel like that works better because I've gone through and I've tried to create a couple other worlds and other magic systems and other things that are outside of what we're doing, and it's a lot harder. So I'm almost like, hey, Dad, just go make me some framework, and I'll go play with it later. But I kind of feel like that's like, he puts up the framework and it's like, okay, what can I do to play with this? And then going back to the whole, approaching it with this analytical engineering mind and see, okay, what can I tweak? What can I put in here to make this, expand this particular aspect of the story, or, things of that nature. So.
It sounds like you've really got it. Oh, I'm like echoing a little bit. That might be on my end. It sounds like you. For those watching live, if someone can tell me if I'm echoing, just let me know. I think it might be on my end. But it sounds like you both have it like really figured out and what works best between the both of you. I don't typically do this. I typically wait until the end to go to audience questions, but Eva asked a really funny one that I have to pull out and ask here. So who is the easier one of the two of you to work with? I saw that question pop up and I was like, this is perfect timing.
I am.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Yeah. I will. There's been many times when he's like, well, what about this? And he offers a solution. And then I go off on a 15-minute rant of, no, we can't do that because it interrupts this and it disrupts this. And I, point out all the stuff, and I can just, because we're on the phone most of the time when this is going on. So I can just see him going, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. I saw that come in and I was like, this is golden, like perfect timing. I have to ask it. Not trying to ruin any writing relationships here, but it was a great question.
That's just the way it works. I mean,
so I've only got two questions on my end left, and then I'll go into the audience questions because there are a bunch that are coming in. Some of them I'll condense a little bit, so they're combined. But what has been your favorite part of publishing so far? You've been publishing for a long time. What has been that like favorite moment or standout moment to the both of you?
You want to go first, or want me to go
Sure.
first?
I think for me that probably the coolest thing was when Michael Kramer agreed to narrate our novel, and it was like, wow. And then listening to the tracks as they were coming in. So unlike, I know there's some other indies will work through like Podium and some other smaller audio production companies, and I know authors don't always get a whole lot of interaction with the narrators. And but I approached Michael and Kate specifically and just reached out to them and said, hey, would you be interested in this? And they said, send it over. And then about a week later, they're like, yeah, let's do it. And I'm like, wow. But and we decided to have Michael narrate because there's more male POVs in the first book, and I'll probably switch and might bring in Kate for some of the later novels. But that was really cool. That for me, that was listening to the tracks and listening to Michael read my stuff was like, whoa, holy cow. Like this is really happening. Holy crap.
Yeah.
And that was just not even a year ago. And so, and there's been a lot of cool stuff. I mean, I enjoy going and doing book signings and attending conventions, but I think hearing that audiobook was probably the crowning moment for me thus far. What about you?
I think it was when I actually had a book in my hand that we opened up the box and I get the book out and I have this book in my hand that we just published a book, and I have the physical thing in my hand, to say we published a book. It's almost like a Back to the Future moment. See, you can do anything if you put your mind to it.
He actually said that.
And I did. I said that. But yeah, that was kind of it for me, just having it in my hand.
So follow-up question, not the last question. But I'm curious because those are such amazing experiences. I suppose I wanted to follow up and ask after that, like what has been, and I know this is like trying to choose, I don't know, your favorite child or something like that, but what has been your favorite project so far to work on? So it doesn't necessarily, maybe not necessarily the best, but what has been your favorite to work on? And tell us a little bit about it.
I think our first, the initial book that we wrote and published, The Dark Necromancer, which is now going to be, we're redoing it, and it will now be the second book in the series after A Princess Errant. I think writing that book and getting that book published, I think that was at the time, it was my favorite, because it was really the first one that we actually published. That's it for me. But
I think I'm going to go with our old book 3, which is now going to be book 4, The Mage's Agenda. That was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that one a lot. I guess because I got to have a lot of freedom in developing the novel. So I'm going to back this up a little bit. When my dad had gone through and decided to go start from the beginning, he created 5 different storylines. And so we had written the first 2 storylines in the first book we published. And then I started working on the third one. And all he had was 5 paragraphs of the entire plot. And so I got to play around with it quite a bit. Of course, there was a lot of framework there, but I was able to go through and develop characters. I built an entire city that is where the majority of the story takes place. And like him, I drew it all out on a map, and it's like to scale. So it was a lot of fun. And I got to explore kind of the magic technology side of our universe. And because this city is left over from a period of time when the magical technology was really abundant and almost borderline science fiction in some ways. And so I got to kind of combine, my love of epic fantasy, and then bring some sci-fi elements into it. And that was, kind of fun. And so that was probably my favorite project to work on. My least favorite has been The Prisoner of Tardalum. Right now, hate that book. Only because
is that the current book? Getting edited? The one getting edited right now?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's his baby.
That one took me the longest to write, and it's just, I think it's because of the frustration, honestly. So,
well, we got to a point, and like Robert was saying earlier, we got to a point in that book that we're trying to wrap it up, because it's a standalone with A Princess Errant, and with all our other books, they all are in a series, and so they all link together. Well, this one kind of links, but it's taking place, many years earlier than the current series, and so we have to tie it off. And it was like, how are we going to tie this sucker off?
Yeah,
and that was hard. That was what was kind of hard about it.
Yep. I mean, it's a good story. It really made me stretch, and it kicked my butt quite a few times. So, yeah.
But sometimes those are the best stories, though. The ones that really kick your butt. My last question for the both of you, and this is something I typically ask everybody who comes on the IndieVerse, just because a lot of folks, myself included, are either new to publishing, early on in their publishing journey, early on being self-published, etc. So my question is if you could go back to the moment before you clicked publish on your first book, before you published it, and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Get a good editor.
And say one piece of advice, I can pull off like at least 5. Yeah.
We screwed up really bad going through this whole thing. That's why we're kind of where we're at today.
Yeah, I wouldn't say, let's see, I would say be prepared to invest in the same, if you want success, be prepared to invest the same amount of money that a traditional publishing house is going to invest in the pieces that they publish. Because we've tried it the cheap way, and it's been okay. And then going back and having a top-notch editor and cover designer, and then actually, you know, getting it made into an audiobook and having a good narrator is, though all those things were, I think, pivotal to the change that we've seen versus what we are publishing now and versus what we initially published. And, you know, back then it was a lot easier to stand out 9-10 years ago because there weren't as many indie titles. And now there's just, you know, so much now. And so yeah, that would be my advice, is just invest into the work as much as a traditional publishing house would.
That's a great piece of advice, and I feel like it's also easy to fall into like traps as like a self-published author of people who might not actually be the best at what they do, claiming to be, and stuff like that. And yeah. No, that's a great piece of advice. We're going to go to audience questions. If anybody in the audience has a question, please do let me know. This question comes from Eva, and there's a whole bunch of questions in the audience chat. We might not get to all of them, but which popular / well-known fantasy series, fantasy series, do you think could have been done better, if any? I think that's a really interesting question. Hard to think of one off the top of your head. I'm trying to think of one too on my end, but I'm like,
I don't know. Yeah, I'm stumped.
Yeah, well,
you could have done better. I don't know.
Done better.
I'm gonna say none.
I don't. I've enjoyed all the ones I've read, and it's, you know, and, you know, talk about David Eddings and a lot of that, his stories and going back to Tolkien and his stories and things like that. They were excellent. They were great. I loved them.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they were all wonderful. He was saying no pressure. It's okay. Just say Harry Potter.
Just say Harry Potter. Okay, I know one change I would make to Harry Potter. So yeah.
Another question is, do you draw maps?
Yes. In fact, there's one right there
Very
that
cool.
I've drawn, and another one back there. So yes, all the maps that we have published, he did kind of a basic drawing of it, and then I've gone back through and just kind of redone the maps. And then like my process, what I normally do is I'll hand draw, and then I'll scan it in, and then I'll redraw it all in Photoshop. And so it takes a little longer. I mean, I've tried drawing a map on my wife's iPad, and it's okay, but I feel like I have more flexibility with a pencil and paper.
Mm-hmm.
Probably not really, but it's just, you know, it's in my head. But yes, we've done all of our maps, and it's been a lot of fun. I joined the Cartographers Guild and picked up a lot of good information there. They have a lot of great tutorials. So if anybody is looking to expand their map collection, or, you know, in their books, or do it themselves, highly suggest going to the cartographersguild.com, and they have a lot of great stuff there.
Very cool. That's a great suggestion. I'm definitely going to have to check that out. A few more questions here. So Elwood is asking, biggest argument, and just so you know, Elwood is actually my brother. Biggest argument / fight you've ever, so it's a family event this evening. He doesn't typically come to all of my streams, but he's in a lot of them. Biggest, I'm going to change this, like disagreement you've had over something while writing.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I would say probably how we were going to finish Prisoner of Tardalum. I mean, we went back and forth on that one a lot. Usually it's not, I mean, I don't know. What do you think?
No, I'm going to say that one too. But most of it has kind of been through little differences of what, like little minor tweaks to the story where we've kind of gone back and forth on. I don't know. I think I would say, I mean, there's definitely been some, like most of the like major changes that we've done, you'd think that maybe that was going to be a big argument, but no.
Well, a lot of times it's he'll think of something, and like he said before, he'll think of something. Well, we ought to try to do this a little differently. And I've been thinking about it too myself, and I'm thinking, yeah, you're right. We ought to do this differently, or change the way this character is and is acting.
There was something in A Prince's Errand that I remember we were talking about, and it was in Iltar's line, and I just remember that we were going back and forth on some particular point. I don't remember what it was. But that one kind of stands out. There's a little bit of
ideas
emotional
like
stamp
really
there.
well. It's
Yeah,
like
okay.
So yeah,
I don't remember that one. Maybe I don't know. I don't remember that.
yeah.
Oh, maybe it was it his? Is it? Oh, no, maybe not.
I don't know.
There's a few more questions. There's quite a few more questions actually, but I've got two that I think I want to end off with here that are both from Eva. They're really great questions. And the first is, to imagine co-writing with my son sounds amazing. Did you ever imagine such a situation while younger? So Dan, I suppose this one's more to you.
Yeah, not really. Like I said earlier on, that a lot of this was just initially just stories that I had in my head that I like, we talk about. And it was more of a oral kind of a thing, verbal kind of a thing, and not really thinking about it. So not really when I was younger. I always approached it as just something fun,
I kind of did. I remember I think I was 16, and my dad had been doing it since I was 5. He'd been kind of tinkering around, and I had a dream that my dad and I were getting interviewed for these books, and my dad had initially at that time, because I was giving him some suggestions, and he's like, maybe I'll give you a co-author credit or something if I ever publish this, and you can get us, share the royalties. And I'm like, sure, why not? Great. Don't have to work for any of the royalties.
Yeah. Little did you know.
Yeah. So, 16-year-old me thought, oh, that'd be kind of cool. And I remember having that dream and waking up and thinking, that would be neat. Like, that'd be really cool if we ever got interviewed, and as authors. And I thought, huh. And then I didn't really think of it after that until, I guess, shortly before he approached me on it. And I thought, that'd be kind of cool if we worked together. And then that was just kind of about it, but never really, not much. So, yeah.
And the last question that I thought was a great place to end was, which book should I start with as a new reader to your work? And I'm also going to post your website, which I was just on to get the link in the chat, so I can pop that up on screen while you tell us which book we should start with.
I think A Prince's Errand is probably the best jumping off point. We wrote A Prisoner of Tardalum that it could be, but I think you get a better introduction to the world through A Prince's Errand. We also have a free novella that we give out for anyone that joins our mailing list that takes place before the events of A Prince's Errand, about 10 years. And it's kind of an introduction, so you kind of get to know the characters. But I mean, it's a fun story. And while you will kind of get a little glimpse, you're only going to get like a little bit because it's just this tiny adventure. Where with The Prince's Errand, you get a better idea with the scope of what the world is really about and the conflicts that this world is facing, and kind of get an idea of what the different societies are. And there's kind of a soft introduction to the magic system where we ease people in. Our other books always started off very abrupt, and we just throw you right into the action. You know, page 2 is the inciting incident, and you just go off running. We didn't really do that with A Prince's Errand. We had a lot more of a gradual, slow build. And I think that actually lends better to, especially to the epic fantasy genre, because people are expecting a kind of a little bit of a build-up. Not necessarily, you know, a 500-page build-up, but, you know, I think A Prince's Errand is probably the best place for you to start off. And it's on sale today through Saturday, so you can pick it up for only 99 cents.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I've got this on the screen right here. Thank you both so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. We are getting just to 7 p.m. here, so really appreciate the time. Thank you to everybody in the chat who came and interacted. This video is obviously going to be available beyond just this live session, so everybody can come back and watch. But Dan and Robert, I'll turn it over to you. If there's anything else you want to add or say, and then we can sign off for the evening.
Go ahead.
Okay, I was going to let you go first. Let the young go first.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we just want to thank you for having us on the show. We love it. We love doing interviews. That's definitely one of my favorite things, being able to interact with other people, and it's fun because it's like, oh, I'm not actually in a bubble. There's other people out there.
Writing can be very isolating. It can be, that's for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, and I guess for anybody that's considering publishing or that is considering going indie, you know, I would say just do it. You know, it's a great decision. Probably, I actually like that we're indie rather than traditionally published, and it's fun. It's been a fun journey. It's been hard, but it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'll just echo that. Thank you for having us on. This has been great. We like Robert said, we enjoy having these kind of opportunities, and I think the biggest thing for me is, if you got a story and you really want to pursue it. Don't let anybody tell you you can't, because if there's opportunities out there, and just got to go for it. And especially now with the way technology is and everything, I agree with Robert. I'm glad we're indie publishers. We have a lot more control over what we do than if we were traditional publishing. So I enjoy it. It's a lot of work, and a lot of effort, but it's worth it. It's worthwhile. And thank you again.
Oh, well, no, thank you both. Really appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who joined us and who's watching this in the future. And yeah, really appreciate all of the insights and advice today. I think it's going to help myself and a lot of folks, so very much appreciate it. So I'm going to go ahead and click the end broadcast button now, and we'll see everybody later on the next episode of the IndieVerse. Bye, everybody.